I'd never seen a creature like her before. Not in my 36 years on this cursed planet, and certainly not in the outer zones where frost bites through bone, and even the sun forgets to shine. It was a routine scavenging run at least. That's what I told myself when I strapped on my respirator and stepped into the wind. The outer air whistled like it always did, clawing through the shattered husks of cities that once belonged to something called civilization. Nothing new, just the bones of a dead world, and me walking through its memories. Then I saw her dot at first. I thought it was a trick of the storm, one of those frozen shadows that danced on the edge of hypothermia. But when I stepped closer, my boot cracked, the ice near her leg, and she flinched. That's when I knew she was real. She was small, too small, curled into herself, naked but for a thin silver membrane stretched over parts of her body, like it had once been a suit. Her skin shimmered faintly in the pale blue light, not like human skin, not exactly, more translucent, almost like glass, warmed by moonlight. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, huge, sunken, glowing faintly violet beneath ice-rimmed lashes. She stared at me not with fear, but with something deeper resignation, like she'd been waiting to die, and I'd ruined her schedule. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the way her lips trembled without sound, or the way one arm was wrapped protectively around her chest, like she was trying to hold in what little warmth she had left. Or maybe it was that she looked like my daughter might have if she'd lived. I pulled my coat off without thinking, threw it over her, and wrapped my arms around that trembling body. She weighed next to nothing, just bones and breath, barely holding on. She didn't struggle, didn't ask who I was. She just pressed her forehead into my neck, like she'd been waiting for a heartbeat to come save her. I carried her back to the rover, and even then, she didn't speak. Not with words, but her eyes never left mine, not once. Inside, I wrapped her in thermal blankets and flooded the compartment with warmth. The heater strained against the wind, but she stopped shivering after a while. She clutched the coat like it was made of fire, and when I offered her water, her hands shook so hard that I had to hold the canister to her lips. Still nothing, no voice, no sign she even understood me. But when I reached out to take the empty flask back, her fingers brushed mine and held on. That was the first time I felt it. Not her skin, but the flicker of something in my chest. Something I thought had died with my wife and daughter years ago. A pulse, a purpose. She didn't let go for a long time. I didn't ask her who she was or where she came from. Truth was, I didn't care. She wasn't a threat, and she wasn't a ghost. That was enough. For the next few hours, we drove in silence. Occasionally, she'd glance at the dashboard or out the window, but mostly she watched me. I could feel her studying my every move. Not afraid, just curious. Like I was the alien. Maybe I was Dot at base camp. I brought her into my shelter. It wasn't much, a retrofitted mining pod, half buried in snow, with just enough power to keep the cold out and the loneliness in. But she stepped inside like it was a cathedral. She touched everything. The table, the heater vent, the old photo of my wife and daughter I kept taped to the wall. When she reached out for that, I almost stopped her, but her fingers hovered just above the glass, tracing the faces. Then she looked at me again, and in that moment, something in her eyes changed. She understood. I warmed up some protein broth and tried to coax her into eating. She sniffed it first, then dipped one finger in cautiously. When she tasted it, her expression didn't change, but she ate the rest quietly, delicately, like it was ritual. Afterward, she curled up on the cot in the corner, wrapped in every blanket I had. I sat in the chair across the room and just watched her breathe. She looked so small, so breakable, like if I turned away, she might vanish. With the snow, that night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape, weight. possibility. The next morning, I found her standing by the door, staring out at the snowfields. When she turned to me, she pointed at her throat, then shook her head. She couldn't speak, or maybe she didn't know how. I nodded slowly, then picked up a stylus and handed it to her. She looked at it for a second, confused. So I took a tablet and wrote, "Are you hurt?" She stared at the words, then tapped the screen, slowly, awkwardly. No hurt, just alone. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to ask her 1,000 things: where she came from, what species she was, how she got here. But all I said was, "Not anymore." Her fingers tightened around the stylus. That afternoon, I taught her how to use the tablet. We didn't speak with words, not yet, but the messages she sent were short. Careful, sky burned, people gone, was hiding. Then cold, waited, thought I'd vanish. Each line was like a piece of glass, clear, but sharp enough to cut. I learned her name wasn't something I could pronounce. She wrote it once, Zelniva. I called her Shale. She didn't correct me. In the days that followed, we fell into a rhythm. I'd cook. She'd help me sort salvage. Sometimes she'd sit near the heater, just watching me. Other times, she'd draw strange shapes in the snow with her finger, constellations I didn't recognize. At night, I read from old books, out loud. She'd lie on the cot, eyes wide, listening to every word. Sometimes, she'd mimic the sounds silently, lips moving, in rhythm with mine, trying to learn. She was a fast learner. By the end of the week, she could say a few words, broken, soft, but hers, "Thank you," that was the first, followed by, "Home." I looked around the tiny shelter, the cracked walls, the frayed wires, the photo still taped to the steel. "Not much," I said, "but it's yours, if you want it." She smiled, not a full smile, not yet, but enough. One night, I found her standing outside, barefoot, in the snow. Her silver skin shimmered under the aurora, and her eyes were full of tears. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, then whispered, "Sky, remember?" She pointed upward, toward the stars. Then her voice broke. "No more sky." I walked to her, slowly, put my coat around her shoulders again. "You've got something better now," I said. She looked at me, confused. "You've got a hand to hold." She stared at me for a long time. Then she reached up and took it. Her fingers were still cold, but they didn't shake. I'd never heard anything like the sounds she made that night. They weren't sobs, not exactly, not even cries. More like a shaking release from somewhere deep in her bones, as though centuries of silence were cracking open all at once. I stayed with her in that cramped, dim-lit room, my hand never leaving hers. She didn't let go, not even for sleep. Maybe she feared I'd disappear if she did. When morning came, she was still there, and so was I. Her skin, once pale with frostbite, had warmed ever so slightly. The bioscanners I'd hooked up beeped with steadier rhythms, vitals stabilizing, cells regenerating. She was healing, slowly, but the soul that takes longer. She watched me now, differently. Her eyes, huge and almost luminous in the half-light, followed me across the room, not out of fear, but curiosity, weariness, maybe a hunger for meaning she didn't know how to ask for. I sat beside her again, offering a soft smile, and peeled an orange I'd brought from the greenhouse. The scent of citrus filled the room. Her nose twitched. I offered her a segment. She didn't move, so I took a bite myself, chewed slowly, and held it out again. This time, her hand reached, delicate, trembling. She held it like it might vanish. When she tasted it, her eyes widened, not in shock, but something close to awe, a quiet kind of wonder. Maybe it had been years since she tasted anything not rationed or synthetic, or maybe she had never eaten a fruit at all. That was the first real connection. In the weeks that followed, she grew stronger. She still didn't speak, but she listened. Every sound, Every word I said. She absorbed it, like lifeblood. Her ears, hidden under delicate folds of soft tissue, would twitch toward my voice. I read to her. At first, children's books, human fairy tales, old earth myths. She liked those. Her eyes would narrow, her fingers twitch, like she was imagining herself in those stories. I caught her once mimicking the flutter of wings when I read about fairies. Another time, she pressed her forehead to my chest when I said the word home. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand. Her name was not something I gave. It was something she gave me. One night, as I closed the book and prepared to leave her room, she pointed to herself with a shaky finger and said, "Solari." Her voice was broken, raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. But it held weight and meaning. I stared, stunned. "Solari," I repeated. She nodded, then pointed at me. "Me?" I asked. She tilted her head, thinking hard, then whispered, "Father." That broke me. I don't cry often. Haven't, not since the accident that took my own daughter. But that night, I sat beside her bed, held her hand, and let the tears fall. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt like I could breathe again. Solari, in the weeks that followed, she began to explore the station. Not fondly, the observation deck at first. She was fascinated by the stars. She'd press her hands to the glass, watching them twinkle. I stood beside her once and asked, "Do they feel like home?" She didn't answer, but the way her eyes shimmered, maybe she was remembering something, or dreaming for the first time. The other crew didn't know about her. I had scrubbed all logs, rerouted surveillance. To them, Room 17 was under quarantine for failed cryogenic experiments. No one asked questions, but I knew I couldn't hide her forever. One day, she saw the ship's docking, a resupply shuttle, standard procedure. She pressed her face to the window, eyes wide. "More?" she asked. I nodded. "More people?" "Yes. More humans." Her lips tightened. "Safe?" I hesitated. "Some are, some aren't." She didn't look away. "Will they take me?" "Not if I can help it," I said quietly. She thought about that for a long time. Then she did something strange. She placed her hand over mine, the same way I had done the day I found her. "I stay," she whispered. That simple gesture, that simple word, meant more than any oath. But safety is a fragile thing. They noticed discrepancies in power usage. They began scanning for unusual life signs. I knew it wouldn't take long before they'd trace it back to her room. That night, I sat Solari down. "They're going to come looking." She looked at me, steady and unblinking. "They might want to take you, study you, or worse." Her hands clenched. "I won't let that happen," I told her. But I also couldn't fight the entire command, so we did the only thing we could. We prepared. She had learned faster than I ever expected. Language, behavior, even technical understanding. She was repairing systems, helping maintain life support, quietly, in the background, like a ghost that kept the station alive. But she wasn't a ghost anymore. She was real. She was mine. And when the day came that they entered room 17, armed and suspicious, they found nothing but a room full of humming machines and a single photo on the table. Me and her, standing in front of the stars. The message I left in the log was simple. "If you try to take her, you'll have to go through me." Of course, that wasn't how it ended. Violence wouldn't solve anything. But we had one last card to play, an escape shuttle, one of the old models, decommissioned and forgotten in Hangar C. I had spent nights quietly restoring it. Solari helped. She knew what we were doing. I never had to explain. She wanted to be free, not to run, but to choose her own path. When we took off under cover of a solar storm, the chaos hit our trail. The shuttle was fast, stripped down, but functional. We didn't have a destination, just a direction. Solari curled up in the seat beside me. watching as the station disappeared behind us. "Are we going home?" she asked. I smiled. "We're making one." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time since I lost everything, I didn't feel empty anymore. I felt whole, because she wasn't just an alien girl I'd saved. She was my daughter now, and I would burn every star in the galaxy before I let anyone hurt her again. I remember the sound of her breath when she slept, rhythmic, shallow, like she was still learning how to trust the air she was given. For the first few weeks, she slept curled into a ball, her spine pressed to the corner of the wall, no matter how soft the bedding was. She'd wake up gasping sometimes, her eyes wild with memories she wouldn't explain. I never asked. I only sat nearby, warm tea in hand, waiting for her to steady. She hadn't yet said my name. It didn't matter. When she looked at me now, it was different. Gone was the flinch, the curled lip, the stony silence that followed every offer of food. Now, she met my eyes. Now, she asked quietly what time it was, or where the sun went when it disappeared. Her voice was like broken crystal, but it was there, and I cherished every syllable. The world outside our modest shelter was growing crueler by the week. Winter had deepened its grip, and the snowdrifts reached up the walls like they wanted to bury us in silence. Communications were spotty. Supply drones rarely came. The old terraforming outpost was never meant to house more than one human for long stretches. But I couldn't imagine leaving her behind, not even for a supply run. She had no name, at least, none she offered. So I started calling her Ember, not because of her skin, pale, violet, and webbed with faint, bioluminescent cracks like dying stars. Not even because of her hair, which was a mess of dark silken strands that never obeyed gravity. I called her Ember because of the way her eyes looked when she sat by the fire. Not empty, not lost, but trying, flickering, like something in her still burned, despite it all. One night, while the storm raged like an animal outside, she asked me, "Why do you stay?" I blinked, not expecting the question. She repeated it, slower, more deliberate. "You could go. You have ship, power, supplies. Why do you stay?" I sat back in the chair, letting the silence stretch between us. The heater buzzed. The lights flickered once, then steadied, because I promised someone a long time ago that I'd never walk away from someone who needed me. She tilted her head. "That someone, your kin," I smiled faintly. "Something like that." She didn't ask more, but her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. When she eventually curled up to sleep, she didn't choose the wall. She chose the cot closer to mine. Progress, I told myself. Slow, gentle, real. But the past doesn't forget so easily, and neither did those who had left her behind. The first sign came 2 days later, flash of light across the night sky. Not a meteor, not a satellite, a flare, controlled descent. I watched it from the roof hatch through an old scanner lens. The angle, the burn pattern, it was a scout ship, military class, not human. I climbed down and locked the hatch behind me. Ember was awake. She had felt it too. Her kind had a sensitivity to magnetic shifts. I didn't need to explain. She already knew. "They found me," she said. Not frightened, not angry, just hollow. "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe it's just a patrol." She turned to me slowly, her eyes glowing faint blue in the dim room. "They don't patrol. They hunt." We spent the next few hours preparing. I had taught her how to use the communicator, how to calibrate the motion sensors, how to shut down the outpost's signal beacon if needed. She remembered every step perfectly, but she hesitated at the weapon locker. I opened it. She stepped back. "You don't have to touch it," I said gently. "But if something happens, you need to know where they are." "I won't kill," she whispered. "I hope you won't have to." She didn't respond. By morning, The scout ship had landed 20 kilometers south. Too far for us to see directly, but close enough that our sensors were catching field scans, sweeping arcs of low-frequency pulses meant to map terrain and life. I buried the power source under snow, rerouted the outpost's heat to vent underground. To anyone flying above, we were now just a frozen ruin. Ember stayed silent that whole day, but I caught her watching, really watching me, as if trying to memorize every movement, every habit, as if she expected this would be the last time she saw them. They came at dusk on the second day, not the full patrol, just the scouts. Their figures barely human, wrapped in armor that shimmered like glass dipped in oil. Their language was sharp, statically more clicks than words. I pulled Ember behind the panel wall. She was trembling. "I'll talk to them," I whispered. "No," she breathed. "They'll kill you." "I'm human," I reminded her. "They won't start a war." She looked at me then, and for the first time, there was panic behind her eyes. "You don't understand. I wasn't just abandoned. I escaped. I froze. They didn't forget me. They want me dead. It changed everything." I walked out anyway. The scouts stopped near the entry hatch, scanning. One raised a palm, the universal sign for halt. The other lowered his weapon slightly, just slightly. I lifted both my hands. "You're in human-regulated space," I said calmly. "This is an independent outpost." One of them replied in a garbled version of trade. "Tongue? We seek fugitive." "Biological signature indicates her presence here." "She's not here," I lied. "You lie. She carries mark." They moved forward. "Take another step," I said slowly, "and you'll be violating 2 interstellar accords. I have recordings, I have logs, and I have backup signals ready to send. You'll start a diplomatic incident." They stopped. The lead scout spoke again, softer this time. "You harbored danger. She is not child. She is weapon." I narrowed my eyes. "She's a girl who was left to die in the cold. And now she has a name and a home." There was a long silence. Then they turned and walked away. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew it was only beginning. That night, Ember approached me as I was sealing the window slats. She sat beside me, her knees pulled up to her chest, her voice low and raw. "You would die for me." I looked at her. "Yes. Why?" I leaned my head back and closed my eyes for a moment. "Because when I found you, I remembered what it felt like to lose someone I couldn't save. I wasn't going to let that happen again." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the words I never expected to hear. "I had a name, once." I turned slowly. She met my gaze. "It was Lyra. My mother whispered it before she handed me over to them." I reached out slowly and took her hand. Then, "Welcome home, Lyra." And, for the first time, she didn't pull away. I didn't sleep much after that night. Not because of fear, but because something in me had changed. My instincts were no longer just my own. They were tied to something fragile, something precious. Her, Alex, a name that had become the center of my heartbeat. When the sun rose the next morning, its pale light spilled across the floor where she lay curled up against me, the blanket pulled up to her shoulders. Her breath fogged slightly in the morning chill, and I could feel the slow, even rhythm of her sleeping heart against my side. For the first time, she hadn't cried in her sleep. She hadn't flinched or whimpered. Just ... slept. I stayed there, not wanting to disturb her. Outside, the world was waking, birds calling, leaves rustling in the cold wind. But here in this cabin, this little pocket of stubborn warmth, time didn't matter. I just watched her breathe. It's strange how quickly a stranger becomes something else. How the line between duty and love blurs so quickly you don't realize you've crossed it. She had been a broken child, shivering on the ice. And now, she was my daughter. I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Not to her. I didn't want to scare her away with something as heavy as that word. But inside, I already knew. The moment I found her alone in the snow, something ancient in me, something human had answered. She needed someone, and I had been there. Later, that day I made soup from what we had left, in the pantry some old, dehydrated vegetables, broth cubes, and rice. She sat at the table, still wrapped in her blanket, her eyes following every movement I made. "You don't have to be afraid of the kitchen," I said, trying to smile. "It doesn't bite." She looked at me, then cautiously touched the edge of the wooden table with her fingers. Her nails were oddly shaped, almost crystalline but delicate, beautiful in an alien sort of way. I handed her a warm bowl, and she held it like it was a sacred thing. "Still warm," I said gently. "Take small sips." She looked at the spoon, then me, then tried. The way her eyes lit up when she swallowed the first mouthful nearly broke me. She covered her mouth like she was embarrassed, but her eyes smiled. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The days passed, and she began to speak more. Short sentences, words she mimicked from me. Some were rough, awkward, but she tried. Every word was a bridge, in effort to meet me halfway across the vastness between her world and mine. One night, as the fire crackled and we huddled close again under blankets, she said, "What, ... his father?" I froze. She had been watching an old cartoon I'd pulled up on my solar pad, something from Earth's archives, bright and cheerful and harmless. The characters had called each other names she didn't understand, and now she was asking. "A father," I said carefully, "is someone who stays, who protects, someone who helps you grow, someone who won't leave when things get hard." Her eyes searched mine. "You, our father." I felt everything in me slow. Time, breath, words. "Yes," I whispered, "if you want me to be." She didn't say anything right away. She just nodded slowly, and for the first time deliberately she leaned into me. Her small hand found mine, and didn't let go. That night, she fell asleep with her head on my chest. I didn't move. I couldn't, because for the first time in my life, I was afraid of breaking something, not because it was fragile, but because it meant too much. The next few weeks blurred in a rhythm of simple routines, meals, learning, talking. I taught her how to make tea. She taught me how to pronounce a few words from her native tongue, though most of it came with tears or silence. She was still grieving, still healing, but there was joy now too. I fixed up an old set of wind chimes and hung them outside. She loved them. She said they sounded like the sky singers of her people. I didn't ask what that meant, I just let her smile, and that was enough. One afternoon, as I gathered firewood, I heard her humming behind me. It was the first time I'd heard her make music. It wasn't like any human melody, more like a ripple of rising notes that danced through the cold air. I stopped and listened, hidden from view, and I cried, quietly, like a fool, because I realized that was the sound of someone slowly finding herself again. But the universe isn't kind for long. It was deep in the night when the sky lit up, a streak of silver fire tearing across the black. I ran out, heart pounding, thinking it was a meteor, but it wasn't. It was a ship, small, silent, military, not human. It hovered above the forest ridge, lights scanning the ground. I ducked under the tree line, my breath caught in my throat. I had buried the beacon weeks ago, deep in the snow, after disabling it. But if they'd triangulated her last position, they might have followed the trail. I rushed back inside, locked the door behind me, and found her sitting up in bed, eyes wide. "You saw it," she whispered. I nodded. "Do you know who they are?" She hesitated. "My people? The ones who left me?" A long silence passed between us. "Do you want to go back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked down at her hands. "They don't want me. I single quotes, am ... broken. You're not broken," I said. "Not here. Not with me." Her voice cracked. "Will you hide me?" "I'll do more than that," I whispered. I'll protect you. I packed supplies, told her to stay silent, and led her down into the root cellar I had built years ago. It wasn't much, but it was deep and shielded. I covered her with layers of old gear, made sure she had water and a flashlight. If anything happens, I said, kneeling beside her, stay quiet, no matter what you hear. She grabbed my hand. Please, come back. I will, I said. I swear. Then I shut the hatch. I stood watch through the night. The ship circled once, then twice. Then it disappeared over the hills. But I knew this wasn't the end. Someone knew she was alive, and now, so did I. I never imagined I'd stand beneath two suns, holding her hand as we watched something as ordinary and extraordinary as birds flying. They weren't birds, not really. The locals called them kelru, with feathered fins and glassy wings that caught the sunlight and shimmered like flames. Leary watched them with wide eyes, her body leaning gently into mine, no longer stiff with fear or coiled like a creature waiting to be struck. She laughed, really laughed. It sounded like wind chimes, struggling to remember how to sing. I still remember the first sound she made when she came into my home. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't a word. It was a noise too raw to be named something. Between a sob and a startled breath. She hadn't spoken for days, then weeks. I'd thought she might never speak again. Now, she had questions. So many questions. Do the kelru ever get tired? She asked, her tone half whisper, half wonder. Do they ever forget how to fly? I shook my head slowly. No, sweetheart. Flying is what they were made to do. She blinked, as if trying to imprint that idea into her bones. Then her small voice asked, what if they fall? I knelt down beside her, gently tucking one of her silver-blue strands behind her ear. Then someone like us catches them. She smiled, not just with her mouth, but with something deeper. Something that had finally started to believe in the ground beneath her feet. There was a time I didn't think I'd survive the war. Then, there was a time I did but wished I hadn't. And then came the moment I found her, curled in that broken pod, her skin like frost and her chest barely rising. I didn't know what she was, only that she was alone, and cold, and afraid, and no one, human or otherwise, deserved to die like that. Raising a child is never easy. Raising a child from a species with 3 hearts and no concept of hug was, well, it took some adjustment. The first time I wrapped my arms around her, she flinched like I'd struck her, but I never stopped, never yelled, never threatened, just waited. One day I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, she was there, nestled under my arm. Her fingers were wrapped around mine like vines, fragile but tenacious. That's when I knew it didn't matter if she was born in some distant nebula or grew up under a sky I couldn't pronounce. She was my daughter, mine in all the ways that mattered, and maybe, just maybe, I was hers. Our home wasn't much. A small shelter nestled in the greenbelt outskirts of New Ember. The city had been rebuilt after the war, but scars lingered on. The walls, the streets, the people, especially the people. Aliens weren't welcome everywhere. Leary learned that quickly. The first time we walked into a shop together, the silence was sharp enough to slice skin. Eyes tracked her like she was a threat, like she didn't belong. One woman pulled her child closer. Another muttered something under her breath that made Leary shrink beside me. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I just picked her up, held her high, and walked out with pride in my step and her head buried in my shoulder. Later that night, I told her stories. Not lies, but possibilities. I told her about Earth, about how humans, too, had once judged by skin, by shape, by difference. But I told her how some of us learned, how some of us grew. We've got thick skulls, Leary, I'd said, but we've got big hearts too. Takes time to open 'em, but once we do. She looked at me, her voice barely a breath. Do you think they'll ever open them for me? I didn't promise. I never lied to her, but I held her hand and whispered, they will. And until they do, mine's open enough for both of us. She squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. I let it hurt. Over time, things got easier. At school, some of the teachers hesitated at first. But Miss Renna, the history instructor, volunteered to help. She brought alien history books. Let Leary sit in the corner where she felt safest. When Leary finally spoke up, in class answering a question about pre-Union empires, the room froze, and then clapped. She cried that night. Not because they clapped, but because they listened. That's all she ever wanted. There were setbacks too. Nights, she woke up screaming in a language I didn't know. Mornings, she stared at her reflection like it wasn't hers. Once, she asked if she could wear gloves, because the other kids said her fingers looked like spider legs. I said no. I showed her my own scars, instead. Told her how humans, too, learn to hate parts of themselves, but how we could learn to love them again. We're all made strange, I told her. But sometimes, strange is what saves the world. When the government officials came, I thought they were going to take her. They had records, papers, claimed they were organizing resettlement for non-integrated minors. I stood between them and the door, rage pulsing in my veins. She's integrated, I snapped. She's not human. She's my daughter. Leary stood behind me, trembling, but she didn't cry. Not this time. The lead officer looked at her, then at me, then back again. I don't see an alien, he finally said. I see a citizen. Carry on. We closed the door together. Her small hand rested on mine as the latch clicked. Later that night, I found a drawing she'd left on my desk. Crayons, messy lines. Two figures, holding hands under two suns. One had a long coat like mine. The other had big eyes and Kelru wings. She'd written one word beneath it, crooked but clear, home. Sometimes I still wake up thinking it was all a dream, that I'll find that pot again and fail this time, that I'll reach out and she'll be already gone. But then she runs in with dirt on her knees and stories spilling out of her like stars. She tells me about school, about Kelru mating dances, about how she wants to be a pilot someday, and I know it's real. All of it. Liar, I changed me. Not by force, not with tragedy, but with presence, with quiet persistence, with a heart that had every reason to shut down but chose, instead, to reach out. One night, she asked me the question I didn't know I needed to hear. Do you ever wish it was different? What do you mean? I asked. If you hadn't found me, if it had been someone else, or no one at all. I turned to her, feeling the weight of those words. I wouldn't be alive, I said. Not really, not the way I am now. She looked at me for a long time, then climbed into my lap and rested her head on my chest. I'm glad you found me, she whispered. Even if I was broken. I kissed her hair and held her close. You were never broken, just waiting to be seen. And I see her now, every day, not as an alien, not as a refugee, but as my daughter, my reason, my second chance. And when she flies someday, because she will, I hope the whole galaxy sees what I see. Not a survivor, but a miracle.